all for being here. We are very, very fortunate. I know I said in the first presentation for some of you who were here, if you look at people that you really want to emulate, you want to copy, you want to mimic, David is it. David Campbell has been CEO of publicly traded companies. He's on many boards. He has been on the board, and we hate to say it, but for Niagara. He's a Niagara graduate. Yeah, sorry. Don't hold that against him. He is also, in how I've grown to know him, the founder of what is now Hands-On Disaster Response. He has been around the globe, literally helping after disasters and really bringing a lot of his expertise in running companies to a totally new environment. An environment where your turnover, and you've mentioned this in presentations I've seen before, and you think of a corporate turnover, you might be talking 5–10% per year. You're talking turnovers here of 100% almost per week in some cases. So it just brings up many different challenges. So I think hopefully you have many questions for him, but I guarantee you will get a lot out of it. Or all your money's back, okay? So David.
Hi, thanks Jim, and thanks all of you who came to any Bond Response trips. You know, the model of hands-on was, quote, invented, if you will, only 3.5 years ago after the tsunami, and so it's sort of fun to have other people building off the model pretty quickly. My interest is more in talking to you about what you want to know about, and so I'm going to ask you to be thinking of questions. I'm going to go through a little bit of background just to put it in perspective of what you might want to talk about. Jim touched on a lot of it. My just quick bio relevance would be, you know, grew up in Buffalo, Niagara undergrad. Got it while I was working. I went to work at IBM. While I was working at IBM, I got a master's degree in operations research at SUNY Buffalo. Ended up with 6 years at IBM, and then being a group of people that helped start a company called Computer Task Group in Buffalo. Spent 25 years there, including the bulk of that time as CEO. While I was CEO, I was on the board of both SUNY Buffalo and Niagara for extended periods of time, so I had that sort of relationship. In the 80s, when this is going back, so I graduated Niagara in '63, was in Buffalo until '94. While I was in Buffalo, among other things, just in the time in the 70s and 80s, it was expected that CEOs actually would be on multiple boards, part of the way they had to contribute to the society, in fact, the way to share knowledge and information. And so at one time I literally was on 13 boards, 5 public company boards in Buffalo and 8 not-for-profit boards, including being chairman of Roswell Park Community Center, chairman of the Chamber of Commerce, chairman of the Industrial Development Agency. You know, but it was what was done in those days. Now, quote, good governance says a CEO can only be on one board. That's because you should focus only on one thing. I think, frankly, it's artificially narrowing, and it limits the ability of a CEO, active CEO on a board, to bring a more realistic perspective of issues to overall board conversations. And the best way, one of the better ways to learn how to be a good board member is to see how other board members run. But among the other boards I was on included M&T Bank for 12 years, National Fuel Gas. Right now I'm on the board of Gibraltar Industries and chairman of the audit committee for those of you who are interested in that stuff. I've been chairman of the audit committee at Gibraltar for 12 years, I guess. Was chairman of the audit committee of a major software company that was then acquired by IBM. On the audit committee of Tektronix, which was $1 billion manufacturer out in Oregon. So I've spent, as I was commenting to one of the professors earlier, I would guess about 50 audit committee years, I guess, over the last 12 years. So I have a lot of perspective on those issues. But then, you know, the hands-on experience for me came about when, after the tsunami, the last company I had run up in Boston was very internet-based, and the tsunami was the major event in the world when it happened, December 26, 2004. And my leap of faith was that if I was in the middle of the disaster area and had access to the internet, I could do something differently than other people would. So I went, we created a working model for spontaneous volunteers. That model, when Katrina hit in the United States 8 months later, we use to form the official 501c3, the IRS paragraph that identifies not-for-profit organizations. So we incorporated over Labor Day weekend in '05. We're on the ground working in Biloxi, Mississippi on September 6th of '05, and organized 1,500 volunteers in the next 5 months with a completely made up on the scene organization. One of the things I would suggest to you as you go out and if you go to work at M&T Bank or National Fuel or Gibraltar or any of those places or anywhere else, the shocking thing is that the skills you're developing, the skills you could be developing right now or this week or this year or then, are all relevant in some unknown ways to things you'll be doing in the future, like doing Excel spreadsheets and writing and listening skeptically, like, do I believe this guy or not? And when you read, whether you're doing required reading courses, do I believe the opinion this person's coming to me with? One of the things I've felt when I read the newspaper, like New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, is that on every article there should be a rating that says this person is very liberal, very conservative. You know, on a spectrum of 0 to 10, you should get a rating so that you know when you start the conversation, you know, this person's a bigot. Okay, I want to hear what they have to say, but I'm going to factor it. I think right now you should be starting to select the information sources you trust. And those that you don't trust, you still read, but you read them very skeptically. You take data from them and you compare it to something else. I mentioned in the earlier session, you know, a simple, sort of a dumb website is the Drudge Report, but it's an easy first place to go because it gives you a click to every opinion writer. So you can go to Drudge and hear what Ann Coulter has to say and hear what Tom Keene has to say and compare the two and start to develop the skill of skeptical or critical reading. Because that skill will be very useful to you 5 years, 20 years, and 15 years from now. And you don't, I mean, literally when I made the decision in January of 2005 to go to Thailand, I was 64 years old. I went 63. I don't want to, I've got proof. My point being, you can do this stuff anytime. You can do it next week with Fauna Responds. You can do it for 30 years. You'll build the skills up over your professional career, and those skills can be used in ways you don't anticipate. And so, you know, sort of the quick career of business responsibilities. And the thing I find for me, I do hands-on as a volunteer. I'm unpaid, which helps me raise money from donors, and I can do it because of having 40 years of working 60-hour weeks to create enough value so I can afford to do hands-on for free. So it's, if someone had asked me 10 years ago, what are you working so hard for? I wouldn't have said so I can go build houses in Bangladesh. But in fact, that's what it turns out to be, because that's what satisfies me. And when I found this several times when I was down in Biloxi. I mean, our quick run of projects, for those of you who weren't here in the earlier one, was we did Thailand after the tsunami, and then Katrina, our big one. After Katrina, and the next, which took us into mid-2006, we then did a project in Indonesia, in a Muslim community, after the earthquake there, in the Philippines, from 6 into 07. In 07 going into 08, we did a huge project in Peru after the earthquake there, where we brought 560 volunteers down to Peru. And while we were in Peru, the cyclone hit Bangladesh, and so for the first time, we chose to have 2 projects going on at the same time. We did an assessment in Bangladesh, launched a project there, lived in a Muslim community in remote Bangladesh, in Rayanda. While we were in Bangladesh, the Midwest flooding happened in the summer of 08. We did a massive project. Some of you from Fauna Responds came out to Iowa. We had over 2,000 volunteers work in Iowa, what we call Project Cedar Rapids. And as Cedar Rapids was coming toward a close, the 4th hurricane hit Haiti. The Caribbean the Gulf Coast didn't get hit too bad in spite of Bridge City and Ike. We were watching the hurricane activity, and Haiti, which is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere and has had a whole series of long-standing problems. One of their problems is deforestation, and after a series of hurricanes exacerbated the impact of deforestation that had created massive flooding of mud into the city of Gonaive. So it wasn't a city that was flooded with water, it was flooded with mud to 3 feet deep. And that mud is still in the homes and schools, clinics and so on in Gonaive. So we started a project in Gonaive, it's still working, we've extended it twice, and we'll be in Gonaive to the end of March. So that's our project history to date. So we're a very young organization, I consider a small organization. Economically, our fiscal year runs from September 1, because we incorporated the weekend after Katrina. So we've now had 3 full fiscal years through August 31, 2008. In our last fiscal year, we raised and spent about $500,000. We have 5 paid employees. Our international ops director and our domestic ops director earn $44,000 and $36,000 a year. Our project director for Haiti earns $24,000. I've got a communications manager who earns $32,000 and a development coordinator who earns $24,000. So the 5 of them add up to $160,000. Everything else, and in that 12-month period of time, we had almost 3,000 volunteers coordinated. So a reasonably hyper-effective model to get benefit to people. But to me, the reasons for people to volunteer and the message we say about hands-on is we really do 3 things. Like when we go to Haiti to help fix a school, fix a church. We do a physical thing of putting a roof on a school. We do a psychological thing of showing up and telling people in Haiti that people outside of Haiti know you had a problem and care enough about it to get off their butt and come and help you. And that has inestimable value to those people. And it helps the individual volunteer to be able to do something that directly impacts someone who absolutely clearly has a need. For example, our teams in Haiti literally go down the street, see a family living on the roof of their house because there's 3 feet of mud thick through every room of the house. And over the next 6 days, it takes a team of maybe 6 that long to do it, clear out that mud and the family moves back in the house, and then you go down the street to the next one. It's not sophisticated stuff. You don't need a complex assessment system to say probably the family living on the roof would rather be living in their house. You just have to do the damn work, which is extraordinarily hard work. So we keep track of the millions of pounds. It was 23 million pounds, I think, was the last total of mud we've moved. It ain't good for me to do it, but there's a lot of great young people out there who can do a good job of it. So my main purpose is to sort of, I guess you don't get that many shots of people who sit on company boards, all that stuff. So I'm happy to talk about hands-on, or I'm happy to talk about governance, or when the recession's going to end. So
let's ask that one first. I mean, CNBC will pick this up.
Yeah, you think so?
Yeah.
Not quickly. Next. Yeah, I think we're in for a long haul. I just finished reading a book which I would recommend. It's actually a pretty good book called Great Powers, America After Bush, by a guy by the name of Tom Barnett. And his basic theme is, to some extent, aimed toward you guys. That is that what's really happening, a major force in the world is he would call liberal globalization. That is the American model moving across the world and this emerging middle class economy. I've just finished the book this weekend in The Economist, which is my favorite periodical source of information, is The Economist. Had as one of their special articles this week the global middle class, the fact that we're going to move to the point of having 2 to 3 billion people in the world in the middle class is a new phenomenon, because people, as they move into the middle class, manage everything differently. Their participation in government, their accumulation of assets, their discretionary expenditures, their ability to have education, so you will be part of a world that deals with globalization not as how do we export jobs so we can get our sneakers cheaper, but how do we deal with a world where the model that we've created and proven successful is being adopted and put into use in slightly different flavors in major entities all around the world. So the China middle class will be the largest national middle class in the world in 15 years. I mean, that will be a reality in your business life, that the China middle class will be larger than the American middle class. It's not a threat. I don't say it as a negative thing. It's simply an emerging reality to deal with and think about and understand. Anyway.
watching a video comparing like Japanese corporate governance in the United States, and they're talking about a couple key differences. One is the higher human resource executives, and the other thing is just the difference between how here it's more shareholder oriented versus the stakeholder oriented. When you bring in your volunteering and what's going on with the economy, do you think will shift even more drastically toward the shareholder, stakeholder?
Okay, so the question basically is evolving models of governance, shareholder versus stakeholder, maybe. But one of the unfortunate things is the events of the last 10 years are going to lead to a continuing increase in the perceived need for governance. So people, I mean, if you look at the housing crisis, excuse me, if you look, it's really sort of, I don't know, this will be some personal opinion here. Yeah, personal opinion. So let's look at I'll try to get the housing crisis and look at the segments of it. Okay, you have a seller of a home, a buyer of a home, an originator of the mortgage, the packager of the mortgage, the rating agency on the mortgage, the investment bank that sold the package of mortgages, and the purchaser of that package of mortgages. Those are the steps. And you can look at any place in there and say who did wrong or who should have done something differently. To my mind, in any transaction, you look at the ultimate buyer and say, did you buy something you didn't understand? Well, we can obviously start with the fact the answer to that is yes. People bought things they didn't understand. Why did they not understand them? Partly because they were sold as something that is now different than what it was thought to be. That is, here's a portfolio of American home mortgages, and 50 years of history says that default rates on American home mortgages are only 1%. So to the credit union in Stockholm, that was a good investment and worth an extra 1 point of yield to buy a package of mortgages. And they bought it from Goldman Sachs, so there was an implied brand awareness, and it was rated by Standard & Poor's, and it came out of the United States. But still, the buyer, the shocked buyer, to my mind, has a significant part of the responsibility. The investment bank that packaged and sold them, obviously on page 82 of their information said, you can't depend on historic mortgage rates because who knows what. There's a disclaimer in there somewhere. You know, and this gets down to sort of the truth in packaging information, because what was happening, I think, is people didn't realize, or did realize and take advantage of the power of the integrity of their brand, and they traded on that for a substantial period of time. The rating agencies are really no different in a way than the accounting firms used to be. That is, it's bizarre to think, frankly, that you would have an accounting industry as an overseer of public companies and have the public companies pay the accounting firms to do that assessment. I mean, obviously, if you really wanted to have a pure system, the firms would all pay into a pool, and the pool would assign an auditor, and the auditor would come and say, I'm the government-assigned auditor for this year, and you know, I'll go back tomorrow and I'll negotiate with Ernst & Young the audit fees for the Gibraltar audit. You know, when you think about it, it's a step in governance, but clearly it's not, we're not at the end of a logical progression of true, there is no independent assessment. We will submit reports to the Securities and Exchange Commission, who will look at whether they think we've been frank and candid enough. And now as we move through that home fiasco, we get, okay, what was the role of the SEC in that process? To my mind, it was absolutely possible in any time in the past 20 years, which is when the mess sort of started. And the motivation was, let's make it easier for people who can't afford a mortgage under our normal commercially balanced system of risk and return. Let's stimulate more mortgages for people who can't afford them. Let's make it easier, and let's put Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac into the business of buying those mortgages. That was a deliberate perturbation into the system with no compensating control or reserve set up. The ultimate regulating agency in the United States is the Congress. The Congress can pass any law they want, and to some extent the President, with the ability to appoint the SEC and appoint the Federal Reserve Board. So, subject to confirmation. So you can lay it, you know, on the Democrats because it started with Clinton, and you can lay it on the Republicans because it was, you know, Bush could have fixed it. But frankly, there's nothing wrong with laying it at the doorstep of Congress to say, in a way, you are the ultimate regulatory agency. You funded the incentives to have, low-income homeowners, and this is an absolute causal result of that. And to some extent, I think that might be good. Now, if we're going to move into an era of increased globalization in everything, then the world has to figure out a way that we all can trust things, whether it's packages of mortgage from the United States being bought in Europe, whether it's toys, being bought in America from China, whether it's financial firms in India with people wanting to diversify their investments on a global basis and wanting reliable financial information. We need global standards, so I think we will see increased governance demands. Companies have been pushed to the point where almost the only stakeholders they're allowed to consider are their shareholders, because considering their communities is maybe nice, but it's not going to survive in today's sort of governance environment. So I would say we're going to move in, the United States, I believe, will become sort of a new, more aggressive governance, and it will become a standard for governance, and companies will, I think, be seen as a somewhat more single purpose, more answerable to shareholders than they used to be answerable almost only to their management with modest control from the board.
Meeting that increased corporate governance, how do you meet that demand? Just through Congress passing laws and regulations? Or, what I personally feel is that we do need to go towards, communicating more to shareholders, having more of a stakeholder theory like they do in companies in Japan. I feel like corporations should have a moral obligation to the communities they affect. But how do you change that mindset? How do you meet that corporate governance demand? Is it through enacting laws in Congress to force them to do so?
No,
it's hard to change the complete mindset.
I think one force, and the general phrase of corporate social responsibility sort of comes to mind. And one force, I'm sorry, can't hear. So the question is, how might this come about? And that is, the individual's opinion is that corporations should have a broader set of responsibilities. How will you cause that to come about? I don't think you will cause it to come about by governance. I think actually governance will push against it. The thing that will push for it is new employees, new graduates saying, I want to work in a company that has an active, real corporate social responsibility. And I'll use example, if company A offers me a $60,000 job, but I don't like their corporate social responsibility profile, and B offers me a $50,000 job, I will have the corporate social responsibility commitment that I will say no to the 60 and tell them, and I'll take the 50. Now, if you're ready to do that, you'll change the corporation.
Somebody will take that $60,000 job.
If they want you and you say no, they will hear that. Somebody will fill the job. But corporations are profit-seeking. They're like a heat-seeking missile. They're profit-seeking. They will do what they need to do to compete, whether it's compete for financing, compete for talent. To the extent that the people inside the company are willing to say, I'm willing to sacrifice something to be with a company that I identify with, the companies will hear that. To the extent that they don't hear that, a company, a classic example is sort of Berkshire Hathaway with Warren Buffett. Berkshire Hathaway does not give away any money. They came under so much pressure from their shareholders, they ended up saying, all right, we'll let each shareholder, for each share of stock you have, you can direct X dollars and we'll direct that money. We, corporate management, will have no role in directing where that money goes. Now, if that happens, you don't have funded centers and buildings on a campus, for example, where a corporation might have funded that, where as a way for the management to direct. Now, if it's a public corporation, and there's many examples of the Pfizer building at Columbia University. So the president of Pfizer decided Pfizer will fund $10 million. Is that justified on the basis that the undergraduates will have a better opinion of Pfizer and therefore consider that when they? That's a pretty tenuous link if you're concerned about shareholder value, frankly. And so I think that, the only thing I think will drive corporate social responsibility will come more from employee demand desire than from shareholder demand desire. If you send out a postcard to the shareholders of Company A and said, would you rather have a $20 stock price and a great CSR profile, or a $25 stock price and a lousy CSR profile? More people would say, send me the 25 and I'll decide how to spend the $5. I'll take care of what I want as a shareholder. I mean, so I think it's going to be slow in coming, and I don't think it's going to be imposed by governance. One man's opinion.
Given the current climate and the fact that many of us are either seniors or graduating MBA students, obviously the job market is very tough and very competitive right now. A lot of us are having a hard time finding even opportunities to be interviewed. What's the best way for us to, I don't know if the word is wait out this recession, but to get through this recession without hurting our marketability for when the economy does turn back around?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would guess a couple things. Skill development. I think it's better to, so number one, I guess it's incumbent on me to say volunteering's not a bad way to spend time, which adds to your resume, adds to your real world experience, and allows you to create a brand new network of people who know you and you know. So, as an example, at our project in Haiti, there's 40 people there. They're a blend of mix of 20 to 30-year-olds, mostly from, so far we had 18 countries represented. It's a different mix of people, and so you get a different mix of views of people who've been out in the world for 5 to 10 years. So being part of a project like that, whether it's with us or some other volunteering group, is one way. Number two, the lower the salary you get, the more responsibility you're likely to get. Going to work, if you sort of ignored the compensation and thought only of the skill development and responsibilities you were going to get, where would be the best place to really learn how to really do something? You may have more responsibility, to be extreme about it, managing a Dunkin' Donuts than you would being the bottom level credit analyst at a Fortune 500 company. And so part of it is, you will probably, in contrast to me, where I went out on the assumption that I will work for one company for most of my career. It didn't turn out that way. I'm sort of unsteady, I guess. But you will probably work for 5 to 10 different companies over the course of your career. It's just a more fluid world now than it was from both sides, both from the employee side and the employer side. So I would tend to look more at skill development. That is, if you're in either the family business, the small business, the not-for-profit businesses are all places where you might have a task where you're actually writing the grant application for, the community health center in Bradford that doesn't know how they're going to compete for the stimulus funds to put in an EHR system. Right? So there's going to be $18 billion in the stimulus package for electronic health records. Drop in the local community health center and say, quote, make it up, what's your plan to get those funds? What funds? The stimulus bill. What bill? And say, how about if I come in and do that? And I'll study it, I'll research it, I'll write the application. Doing that, which I think is available, I would go where the stimulus bill is going to create pockets of flow, of demand flow. I would, frankly, hard as it is, ignore the compensation and go for the skill development. I think I talked in the earlier session, not here about the rheostats, but I found from that experience of talking with young people at the hands-on projects, and 75% of our volunteers are under 30, but they're generally graduates or in a career, but they're taking a break or they're in between things. They're vibrant and competent, or they wouldn't be in Haiti or Bangladesh or Peru. And I encourage them to think of 2 rheostats. One is the rheostat is compensation. We think the objective is just simply to get the highest number you can. 60 is better than 40. But it's possible to turn the other rheostat, which is expense. Now, you may have student loans, that's sort of a fixed element. But your housing expense can be X or 0.2X if you choose to share an apartment with people. You can have a car or not. You can change your expense rheostat dramatically. And the benefit of having a lower paying job with good skill development and forcing yourself to live at a lower expense level, in my opinion, would be a prudent way to deal across this next 2-year period of time. Don't try to optimize income, try to minimize expense, and live within a job that's available that allows you to do skill development. I also think volunteering, and I don't mean to be maniacal on it, even if it's local, going into the local boys club and saying, I just graduated, I'm looking for a job, I don't want to sit around all day, is there something I can do to help you? Get you into an active involvement, and will expose you to more people, will expose you to activities, and frankly will be doing good for someone else. And it would be better to be doing that than doing nothing. And then if 6 months goes by and someone says, what have you been doing since you graduated? Instead of saying, I'm now a champion foosball player at Kelly's Bar, you can say, I ran the youth program at the boys club, and I think it has a better carry to it. So I would look at skill development as you carry your skills with you all your life, and you'll go through different jobs, building up that set of skills so that you'll have the flexibility to do what you choose is, I think, your best investment in yourself. In the university, you prepare yourself for skill development. In the next 2 to 20 years, you'll build the actual skills of writing, reading, speaking, organizing, analyzing data. And the other is, in this period of time, networks, people networks are important in 2 totally different ways. When I got to a crisis point with hands-on, if it was going to go forward, I needed to raise money. I needed to raise a substantial amount of money, about $250,000 a year for 2 years to carry us from our 07 instantiation into where we are now. And I went out to a circle of friends and said, I'll put my life into this if you'll put in some money. And I got 10 guys to commit 25 grand each for 2 years. Part of it is to think forward to a point in time where you're going to want to go out to a set of people, maybe 20 years from now. And you want those people to believe of you that you're a person they can and do trust. So even think about your own circle of friends right now. Think of everybody in this room. Most of you probably know each other. It would be interesting, for example, we won't, so don't get nervous, if we said, okay, pick the 10 people in the room you trust the most and the 10 you trust the least. And then let's put it up on the board. And think about, you're not going to change your opinion of those people over the next 10 or 20 years. But somebody started to create the personal profile that I'm a trustworthy person. Trustworthy doesn't mean smart. It doesn't even necessarily mean harder working. Trust is something that is a worthwhile asset to create, and you are creating it right now. And you will get a fresh start to create it anew when you start whatever that next career is. And I would suggest it's a very valuable asset. It's not a skill, it's a characteristic. But we know it, sort of like pornography, I know it when I see it. Well, you know it about trust too, and I would suggest that building a network of people you trust and that trust you is a valuable asset that you can start to create now and can carry forward for a long period of time. And the other implementation of what a network is, it's so amazing. So I went to Thailand on this bizarre concept of the internet will make things different, because for me, that was a truth to me. I don't understand Facebook and text messaging and Twitter. I mean, we use them and I know them, but I don't live them. You guys probably do. And that is an example of a new tool that allows networking to take place on a basis that never happened before. So you will be the first people that will move into the business world, and think of the business world writ large. 6 billion people in the world who all will allow you, frankly, to communicate with them in English to a great extent. But you'll have an understanding of things like marketing and pricing and performance reviews and organization that are brand new to them, because you've grown up with a 100-year history of that model in the United States. You know it. They're just going to get exposed to it. And you also have awareness and knowledge of a whole set of new tools that have never been seen in the world before. What a great starting point. So I mean, at times it may seem like it's the worst of worlds, but it's not. We will come through this recession. We will move back to where you're going to be competing, buying and selling and managing into an increasingly integrated environment. And it's a place where you should be able to take advantage of your education and the skills that you continue to develop. So I would be candidly optimistic. I often think of bad times in business. I don't know how many of you are skiers. I was at Hollymount this weekend. I'm not a great skier, but I enjoy skiing and I ski fast. But to my mind, problems are sort of like ice patches. You can't really do anything on them. You just sort of get across them and look for the snow on the other side. To some extent, over this period of time, build your skills, build your reading skills, build your personal management skills, and be ready to move fast when the opportunity presents itself. You got to stay anyway, so you might as well ask a question.
What level of responsibility, if any, for the fallout from Walter would lay at the feet of the board of directors of each of those firms?
That's a good question. A good friend of mine is the president of St. John's, who's on the board of Bear Stearns, Don Harrington. I don't know if you know Don, but he's as good a guy as you can get. Smart, honest.
CFO was a Bonner graduate at Bear. We have a tie too.
Yeah. Don used to be president of NAGRA. He was president of NAGRA when I was on the board. So I would say on a scale of 0 to 100, a significant amount. And it's sort of only a one-step thing. So for example, my mantra at the multiple boards I've been on is risk management. Risk management is an easy thing, an extraordinarily difficult thing to do. A few years ago, people thought you could understand risk management by looking at things like what's our customer concentration by country? Do we have too many customers in Argentina versus somewhere else? They thought that risk management could be concentration of any source of supply and so on. But with globalization and the increasing sophistication of instruments, risk management has become beyond the capability of the normal reporting and the normal board. Probably what the boards could have done in retrospect is have totally independent risk assessment. Now, what I've done at Gibraltar, for example, is have the internal audit function, which reports to me as chairman of the audit committee, and we do a quantification of risk management. It's been a constant evolution, I would say, where we look at characteristics of the business and try to assign them a numerical rating based on, whether it's, if the auto companies go bankrupt, that's a certain impact as an example. And then we use that, we discuss that quantification, and we use that to drive our internal audit processes. But we also try to minimize our internal audit budget, and we try to minimize our external audit budget because times are tough, and we're trying to extract as much profit from the business to support our share price as we can. So there's never extra money for risk management. But I think I would take it one step back. So I would put some of it at the board of directors, and I would say it's a risk management function that needs strengthening. And yet I would have to say that certainly nothing came out of either auditing profession / AICPA or government's SEC that said, you've given us into the amount of time spent on CEO compensation, which has no impact whatsoever, in my opinion, is 100 times the amount of time the board spent on risk management, which had a phenomenal impact on the overall issue. So one could say that the media's hyper concern over the titillating stories of how much somebody gets made, as opposed to idiocy in analyzing the risks the companies were taking, would be a major failure of media, as well as the government regulation of the SEC and Congress.
Thank you.
Yeah. Not very opinionated.
It's definitely an opinion question, but where do you fall on the opposite extremes of the argument about rewarding your responsibility versus the absolute necessity, in some opinion, of pouring the money back into our system and try and prop up the system as it is right now?
Yeah, I find information by headline, scary. I find the need for skeptical reading to be crucial. I think every sensible adult needs to take on themselves a tremendous amount of responsibility to read a set of words and say, what is this bastard trying to make me think, as opposed to what's the reality? And so I tend to step back and say, okay, now, reasonable people were in positions to approve a set of decisions. What might they have been thinking when they did it, and try to work that. So on Wall Street, for example, people are in careers that are extraordinarily risk-based. That is, they may earn high amounts of money or zero. I happen to be a founder, shareholder, and own part of an investment banking firm called Innovation Advisors up in Buffalo. Small firm, 15 people, a couple $1 million a year business. I don't do much with it anymore. And it's a business where people really will make $500,000 a year or zero as a percent of absolute success fees. That is an M&A transaction that they completed. And transactions may complete or may not, and it has something to do with what they do, but it's a total risk-reward oriented compensation system. The media can look at that compensation, if it happened at Goldman or Bear Stearns, as a bonus. The fact is, people either have zero salary or a modest salary and expect to earn most of their compensation through a success fee by the transactions they did, number one. So I think you need to separate what are the compensation norms and why. The second is, in a period of time, in a large organization, many people may have done exactly what was supposed to be done, and I don't think it's appropriate to say the front row is all the guys who lost the money on the CDOs, but everybody in the room is going to eliminate their bonus because one department, caused these losses. And so I think it's possible that bonuses can be paid where a large organization can have a failure, but many units within it can have had success. I think right now, we're in an environment where our decision making is being done by, I would call it media hype. I think businesses like Merrill Lynch didn't understand that and misplayed their hand. So I think they overplayed we better get the bonuses now because we're not going to get them after the transaction with B of A is done. If people are aware that Merrill Lynch got acquired by Bank of America at the end of last year, and before the transaction got approved, sort of disgorged what would have been a pretty substantial, literally billions of dollars worth of bonuses over several thousand people. Still substantial. But I think they misplayed the political/media hand, not realizing that we were no longer in a retained professionals, normal shareholder value world. We're now in a media Congress-driven world, and what they did was totally wrong for that world. I don't have any qualms with government constraints on compensation going forward. I find it a little tacky to change the rules going back. I also think in running corporations, the price of anything is an unusual characteristic. The two people wanting the same piece of real estate, two people wanting the same property, drive prices. And pricing, I mean, if you look at the price of oil, the most, in a way, universally available, oil or steel or grain. So the price of oil has gone from 40 to 140 and back to 40 again. And what happens is when you have, it'd be interesting for your economics perspective, but the impact of modest, meaning 1 and 2% changes in supply or demand of a massively distributed commodity that had that phenomenal impact on price, to me is an indicative of the possible impact of supply-demand on a commodity. The same thing happens in terms of talent. Someone, by their intelligence, their background, or their network, that has the ability to bring business to a firm. For example, if I'm, as an asset manager, able to bring a $100 million asset account to a firm from which the firm can earn $1 million a year, what should two different competing firms pay me to come with that client to the firm? Well, in a competitive, the competitive market, I suspect, has the ability to determine that rate. The firm that pays the highest amount it can justify based on creating value for shareholders will get the person. If that ends up with someone getting $1 million a year compensation, that's the market, and I'm willing to accept that market. So I'm long-term a believer in letting the market set value for compensation. Yeah, keep rolling.
Sorry. As long as we're talking about the compensation of the individuals, what about the stimulus package where we're looking at storing these funds out into so many different areas of the country, and there's a lot of arguments about the pros and cons. I'm curious where you stand on that.
Yeah, I like many people, I'm optimistic and hopeful that I think the change, I think the Obama election was a positive thing, although I would honestly sort of admit to being a lifelong Republican. So that was an interesting, and I didn't decide until after the last debate. I consider the stimulus bill to be, honestly, probably 7/8 or 3/4 palliative and 1/4 stimulation. Palliative in that it's giving money to people in need, but not necessarily stimulative. It's very interesting. In a way, there's a sort of I'm involved in Haiti today in a kind of a similar thing. We're running a project today in Haiti called Cash for Work. After major natural disasters, the economies get totally screwed up. Haiti was probably pretty screwed up anyway, but it's totally screwed up. And what you need to do is get cash into people's hands. And there's a concept, some of you would know more about it than I do certainly, called the velocity of money. That is, if I give, to make the point of it, if you give me $5, it's likely to stay in my pocket for a month. If I give you $5, you might spend it tonight. Well, that's better velocity. We're better off giving the $5 to you than to me, and you can go by characteristics of income and age and demographics and know how fast the money's going to move. So I think the palliative portion of the stimulus is giving money to people who have an unusual pain with the benefit that it will have good velocity. They will spend it in ways that will get it moving. The stimulation part of it, I think, is pretty modest, but anything is better than nothing. And I believe the economy will move negatively for as long as 12 months before it stabilizes, and it'll be 12 more months before it moves positively. I don't think the stimulation bill will do it, but I think we will finally flush out the overhang of the foreclosed homes, and that will allow home prices to stabilize, and that will allow the start of the recovery, the stabilization of value in homes. So I think it's a good bill because it got passed quickly and will do something. And so I think the Republicans are wrong to be trying to make to be so strongly opposed to it. I think that's not helping the country, and I don't think it's helping the Republican Party. So I'm also, just as a side note, if I asked any of you to draw the graph of unemployment rates over the next 12 years, so we're right now at whatever we're at, 6.5% or something like that. I would suggest that everyone in the room would draw a similar curve that goes up to 8.5 or 9, or in my case, maybe 10 or 12. Yet, we will see every month for the next 10 months the shocking headline that unemployment went up. It should be, as we've expected for 2 years, unemployment is where we said it would be. So, let's not, the drumbeat of negative news is, in my opinion, artificial. You know unemployment rate's going to go up. I know unemployment rate's going to go up. Let's not make it a big friggin' headline when the unemployment rate goes up. Let's say we got to get to 10% and maybe stay there for 6 months, and then we'll start to work our way back. As we expected, unemployment is now at 7.4. Big deal. It's like the temperatures are going to go up too, hopefully. So anyway.
Well, I think we have several set of classes and whatnot, but thank you very, very much. Any last questions for David? I would highly recommend I put up the HODR.org if you are interested in seeing what they do, how people...
That's cool. That's what we really do in Haiti, so it's not very glamorous. It's very hard, but it's a lot of fun.
And back to Ken's question, I just want to hit on that. I really do think volunteering, even when you get your professional career going, take some time. I know some people and past friends and whatever, they talk about the reason they picked their job was because they got some time off. And I really do think you nailed that. That's going to get, it's looking out for shareholders, but it's looking out for shareholders through a different way. It's giving employees something that they want and they can't get at other companies. So I think that's something to be thinking about as
When
well.
I talk to corporations also, and you might carry this forward with you, I find that our volunteers get a very different understanding of Asia, Indonesia, Haiti, Bangladesh. You understand a country in a totally different way when you live in it for a month. And whether you're going to sell Procter & Gamble soap or anything else, living in the village and seeing how people buy and sell at the market for any corporation's current employees or future is a great way of getting just a different sense of reality. I do believe you're going to have the right to have a career that's your choice of time spent in the corporate world, in the volunteer world of their choosing or yours, and you can have gaps in it. You can work for 3 years, say I need a break. You come work on a volunteer project for 2 months or 4 months to take a break. It won't cost you anything, and you'll get a whole different experience, and then maybe you'll be ready to go back. And so I agree. Building into your life, I think, will be a real positive thing. And for any of you who were involved with Bonner Responds, I think you guys have done a great job. It's our model that we would like to take to some other universities. So thanks to all of you who participated, and thanks to Jim for leading it. So thanks for having me.